Back in the early 2000s, the Grand Canyon was more than just a tourist destination. Stretching over 277 miles and carved by the Colorado River over millions of years, it was a place of legend, a labyrinth of shadows, and a vault of secrets that had resisted discovery for centuries. For the local Hopi, Navajo, Zuni, and Apache peoples, the canyon was sacred, a home to spirits, stories, and mysteries passed down through generations. In 2003, Ethan Carver, a young explorer obsessed with forgotten corners of the world, set out alone. Ethan wasn't seeking selfies or accolades. He was chasing whispers. In dusty archives and yellowed newspapers, he had uncovered strange references to an underground city, artifacts that supposedly defied history, and journals of early explorers who claimed to have seen things no one could explain. The story was almost too fantastic to be true, but something in the canyon called to him. Ethan paddled a small wooden boat along a narrow bend of the Colorado River, the canyon walls rising like ancient guardians on either side. The water was calm, reflecting the early morning light, but there was an unnatural hush to the air, as if the river itself was holding its breath. That's when he noticed a streak of color on the sandstone wall, faint red and gold, almost glowing in the morning sun. Curious, he tied off his boat and climbed toward it, brushing aside the dry desert brush. What he found took his breath away. Steps carved directly into the sandstone, hundreds of them, winding up toward a ledge high above the river. There was no trail, no signs of modern visitors, only the worn stone, polished by countless footsteps long gone. Ethan's pulse quickened. He followed the steps cautiously, feeling a strange energy in the air, like the canyon itself was aware of his presence. At the top, he discovered a cavern entrance, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. The opening was narrow, a dark slit against the glowing rock. As he stepped inside, the temperature dropped and the air smelled of earth and time. Shadows stretched across the walls, and when Ethan's flashlight hit the stone, he froze. Carvings covered the walls, intricate symbols that were neither English nor Native American. They were geometric, precise, and eerily familiar, as if drawn from some lost language that had traveled across oceans and centuries. Ethan moved deeper into the cavern. The passageway widened into rooms, each carved with astonishing precision. Some rooms were modest, like the size of modern living spaces, while others were massive, with ceilings that arched like cathedrals. There were shelves etched into the walls, holding pottery, some still containing seeds preserved by the dry air. Cooking areas, gathering halls, and sleeping quarters were all carved from the rock. Everything about the place suggested planning, organization, and purpose. Further inside, Ethan stumbled upon a workshop. Tools of copper and bronze littered the stone benches, alongside charcoal and remnants of smelting. There was evidence of metallurgy that should not have existed in North America at this time. On a rough stone table lay a gray metal that scientists today would struggle to identify. Something about the cavern suggested knowledge far beyond the surrounding civilizations, a sophistication that defied conventional history. And then he found the crypt. Rows upon rows of mummies, carefully wrapped in bark, fabric, and clay, lined angled shelves. All were male. The lower shelves held simpler urns and tools, while the higher shelves contained finely crafted vessels and artifacts. The atmosphere was heavy, almost sacred, and Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He was not just in a cave, he was in a city that had been alive, perhaps for thousands of years. Ethan's mind raced. Who were these people? Where had they come from? How had they survived here, hidden from history? The deeper he went, the more the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves remembered every footstep that had ever crossed them. Faint echoes carried through the passages, whispers that seemed almost human, but could they be? He sent a few small artifacts to a local museum, along with detailed notes and sketches, hoping for support. But his requests for a larger expedition were quietly denied. Soon, Ethan noticed the warnings. Certain cliffs and caves were suddenly off limits, marked by ranger signs and occasional armed patrols. On more than one occasion, he saw a black helicopter hovering silently over the cliffs, almost as if someone was guarding the canyon's secrets. Over the following years, many explorers tried to locate the site. Some believed Ethan had uncovered what early 20th century explorers called the Citadel, a massive underground complex hidden within the canyon walls. Others dismissed it as a myth or hoax. Yet the legends persisted. Local Hopi elders spoke of people emerging from the canyon long before recorded history humanoids, smaller in stature, sometimes described as ant people, who guided humanity after great floods. Some legends spoke of sky beings with technology beyond understanding, who gifted humans with agriculture, writing, and knowledge of the stars. Could the underground city Ethan found be evidence of these myths? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Even today, the Grand Canyon hums with mystery. Visitors feel it in the wind that sweeps through narrow passages, in the shadows that linger longer than they should, in the faint markings carved into stone. Every cliff, every ledge, every hidden cavern could hold secrets that defy history, secrets the canyon has kept for millennia. And the canyon waits, silent, patient, watching. Those who dare enter its depths feel the pull of something older than the mountains themselves, a memory of people, civilizations, and knowledge lost to time. Some say, if you listen closely at sunset, you can hear faint footsteps echoing through the stone, urging you forward or warning you to leave. For explorers like Ethan Carver, the Grand Canyon is not just a natural wonder. It is a mystical labyrinth, a place where the boundary between history and legend blurs, and where the past may be waiting, patiently, for those brave or foolish enough to uncover it. In the summer of 2005, Yosemite National Park was alive with tourists, climbers, and hikers. Its granite cliffs, cascading waterfalls, and dense pine forests drew thousands every year. But for some, Yosemite held secrets that went far beyond its postcard-perfect beauty. One such visitor was Clara Evans, a 28-year-old wildlife photographer with a reputation for venturing off the beaten path. Clara loved Yosemite's wilderness, not for its trails or campsites, but for its silence, the moments when the wind rustled the treetops and the world seemed to pause. She was searching for rare wildlife, black bears, mountain lions, and the elusive Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep. But what she found was something she couldn't have anticipated. Clara arrived early in the morning, just as the fog lifted from Yosemite Valley. She hiked into a less traveled section near Hetch Hetchy, where granite cliffs towered over narrow ravines. Birds sang faintly, the air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the sunlight danced on the mist. She paused near a small creek, lifting her camera to capture a deer drinking quietly from the water. That's when she noticed something unusual, footprints in the soft mud that were too large and elongated to belong to any animal she knew. Curious, Clara followed the trail. The footprints led uphill, twisting through dense undergrowth, disappearing and reappearing among boulders and fallen trees. As she climbed, the forest seemed to grow quieter, almost unnaturally so. No birds, no wind, just the sound of her own boots crunching on the underbrush. A shiver ran down her spine. It felt as though the valley itself was watching her. After nearly an hour, Clara stumbled upon a clearing she hadn't seen on any map. In the center was a rock formation that resembled a doorway, an arch carved naturally, yet disturbingly precise. Moss covered the edges, but inside the arch, the stone was polished smooth. She hesitated. The photographer in her wanted to document it. The survival instincts whispered to turn back. Against better judgment, she stepped through. Beyond the arch, the valley opened into a hidden glen, bathed in strange light. It was quiet in a way that made Clara's heart pound, a heavy silence that seemed almost alive. On the walls of the cliffs surrounding the glen were strange carvings, spirals, lines, and figures that resembled animals, but not any species she recognized. There was a sense of intelligence in the markings, as if someone or something had created them intentionally. As she explored, she noticed small stone structures tucked into the undergrowth, tiny shrines with burned wood inside and faded symbols etched into the rock. The air smelled faintly of smoke and resin, as if the site had been used recently, yet she saw no footprints besides her own. Then she realized the carvings weren't just random. They formed patterns that led deeper into the glen, almost like a map. Drawn by curiosity, Clara followed the pattern. It led her to a narrow canyon where sunlight barely touched the forest floor. The canyon walls were so high and close together that her compass spun erratically. She felt a pulse in the air, a vibration that was almost imperceptible but constant, like the heartbeat of the earth. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to shift around her. Trees appeared in places she didn't remember. Boulders moved, or perhaps she was losing track. When Clara tried to turn back, the arch she had entered through was gone, replaced by sheer granite walls. Panic rose in her chest. She shouted, but her voice echoed in strange, hollow ways, carrying farther than it should, or not at all. As night fell, Clara built a small camp near a stream. She heard whispers in the windlow, almost human, impossible to locate. Some seemed to call her name. She couldn't tell if it was her mind playing tricks or something else entirely. Shadows moved at the edge of her vision, vanishing when she tried to focus. She wrote notes and drew sketches by the dim light of a headlamp, documenting everything in case she never returned. By morning, Clara's sense of time had warped. She realized she had no idea where she was or how far she had walked. Yet she felt a strange calm, a sense that the glen wanted her there, as if the carvings were guiding her somewhere important. When she finally saw daylight filtering through the trees again, she found herself at the entrance to a shallow cave hidden behind ferns and fallen logs. Inside were artifacts that seemed impossibly old. Carved stones, animal bones arranged in patterns, and what appeared to be ancient pottery dirt-covered but intact. Clara spent the next day documenting everything. She felt an almost spiritual connection to the place, as if it existed outside of time. The carvings, the stones, and the hidden glen were all part of a story long forgotten by modern humans. And yet, something urged her to leave. A quiet, insistent warning. This valley was not meant for casual discovery. She returned to civilization with photographs, sketches, and samples carefully wrapped. When she shared her findings with the National Park Service, they were polite but firm. This area is off-limits due to fragile ecosystems and safety concerns. She tried to argue the historical significance, the possibility of a lost cultural site, but her words were met with bureaucratic shrugging. Even today, some hikers swear that Yosemite holds areas you cannot find twice. People speak of hidden glens where shadows move against the wind. Carvings appear on cliffs overnight, and whispers echo from places that should be empty. Clara's story is one of many in the valley tales of hikers and explorers vanishing, of strange carvings and patterns in the forest, of moments where time and space feel stretched, almost mystical. Yosemite is a park of undeniable beauty, but beneath the waterfalls, cliffs, and meadows, it carries the pulse of the unknown. Those who wander too far, who follow the whispers in the trees or the markings on stone, may find themselves part of a story older than the park itself. And some, like Clara, return with only fragments of what they saw, memories that feel like dreams and photographs that almost cannot be explained. The valley watches patiently, and every now and then it calls out again. In 1998, the northern range of Montana stretched out like an unbroken fortress of jagged peaks. dense pine forests, and narrow, twisting valleys, a place that had always seemed to defy maps and modern exploration, drawing only the most experienced hikers and hunters into its heart. Among them was Lucas Reed, a man in his early 30s with a reputation for venturing where others would not, a bow hunter who knew the wilderness intimately, familiar with every ridge and creek that snaked through the mountains. He left his cabin one crisp autumn morning with a small pack his bow and a journal to record observations of wildlife, planning to hunt in the remote Silver Creek Valley, a hidden corridor of cliffs and canyons that locals seldom spoke of, and where sunlight barely touched the forest floor during certain hours of the day. He left a note for his family, promising to return within a few days, but the mountains had other plans. Days passed, and when Lucas failed to return, search parties combed the valley, following every trail he might have taken, scouring steep cliffs, fallen log clusters, and hidden ravines, but they found no footprints, no gear, nothing that suggested a struggle or an accident. It was as if the wilderness itself had swallowed him whole, erasing all trace of his presence. Weeks later, a local rancher discovered fragments of clothing near the base of a secluded canyon, just enough to confirm that Lucas had indeed been in the area. Yet there were no other clues. Authorities speculated about natural causes, perhaps an accident, a fall from a cliff, or exposure to the harsh elements, but friends and family, along with those who had spent time in the northern range, could not shake the sensation that something unexplainable had occurred. The mountains themselves seemed to hum with secrecy, and locals had long whispered of a sacred hidden valley within the range, where time behaved differently, where travelers might lose their way for hours or for years, and where the laws of the natural world appeared to bend often, imperceptibly, but with consequences that were tangible and chilling. Stories passed down through generations, particularly among the region's indigenous communities, spoke of spirits that roamed the high ridges, guardians of the hidden valley, who observed intruders with invisible eyes, and sometimes led them away from the safety of their intended path. Hikers occasionally reported strange phenomena, sudden drops in temperature with no wind, sounds of voices that seemed human but carried with a hollow resonance fleeting shadows, darting just beyond the line of sight, and a pervasive sense of being observed as though the very trees were alive, watching, waiting. Lucas Reed's disappearance fit the patterns described in these stories, and those who knew him believed that his familiarity with the wilderness may have, paradoxically, brought him closer to danger, lulling him into a false sense of security in a place that demanded respect and attention beyond human understanding. Speculation about his fate ran rampant, ranging from encounters with wild animals to the possibility that he had fallen victim to the unpredictable terrain. But none of these explanations accounted for the complete absence of evidence, the eerie silence that seemed to fill the areas he had traversed, or the way that even experienced searchers described a subtle distortion in their perception of distance and direction, a creeping disorientation that was impossible to measure but unmistakably real. Some claimed that Lucas may have stumbled upon one of the hidden corridors rumored to exist deep within Silver Creek Valley narrow ravines, shrouded in mist where the sunlight never reached, and where the air seemed thicker, almost electrically charged, humming faintly as if carrying the weight of centuries of secrecy. Hikers who later explored nearby trails reported similar sensations, fleeting glimpses of shapes that seemed human, but moved in ways that defied natural biomechanics, rocks arranged in patterns that shifted or appeared differently when viewed from another angle, and whispers carried on the wind that seemed to beckon them deeper into the woods, just as though the mountains themselves were testing the limits of their courage and sanity. Small artifacts occasionally surfaced: a broken arrow, a fragment of a leather glove, the tip of a rusted metal tool, but nothing substantial enough to indicate what had truly occurred or to offer closure to the mystery of Lucas's vanishing, and a sense of being watched that left hikers unsettled long after they returned to civilization. Some locals spoke of trails that would appear familiar at first, but then twist, impossibly leading explorers back to their starting points without warning, while others described hearing voices calling their names, only to find no one there when they responded, as if the wind had learned to mimic human speech, or as if some unseen entity was observing them playing with perception. Even experienced outdoorsmen admitted feeling a primal fear in certain areas, a feeling that Lucas, despite his expertise, may have underestimated. While authorities tended to explain such phenomena as stress, disorientation, or hallucinations caused by fatigue and isolation, those who ventured repeatedly into the northern range knew better. There was a weight in the air, a presence that could not be measured, yet was undeniable, a kind of invisible barrier between the known world and the secrets that lay beyond it. Over the years, additional cases in the region, though fewer in number, reinforced the legend. Hikers and hunters who disappeared without a trace, sometimes leaving behind a single item of clothing or a small piece of gear, always in areas with dense forest cover, steep cliffs, or hidden valleys where natural navigation seemed impossible. These disappearances contributed to the valley's reputation as a place of caution and superstition, and even seasoned search and rescue teams approached the northern range with a sense of respect bordering on awe. Some theorized that Lucas and others had stumbled into a localized anomaly, a patch of wilderness where the rules of time and space did not fully apply, causing them to become dislocated from both place and reality in ways that made conventional search efforts futile. Others speculated about the intervention of forces beyond human comprehension, echoing the old stories of spirits and guardians that the indigenous communities had passed down through generations, and suggesting that the northern range had always been a place where the ordinary boundaries of the world blurred, creating pockets of mystery that defied rational explanation. Even today, the mountains seem alive in subtle ways. A hiker reports a shadow that follows them along a ridge, a whisper that calls from a canyon wall, a sudden fog that rolls in and obscures the trail, just as if it were sentient. Artifacts and clues continue to emerge, sporadically shards of pottery, fragments of leather, rusted tools, but never enough to answer the questions that remain. Lucas Reed's disappearance remains unsolved, his fate intertwined with the wilderness that claimed him, a place where legends and reality meet, and where the boundary between human perception and the unknown is as thin and sharp as the cliffs themselves. Those who dare venture into Silver Creek Valley are drawn by curiosity, by thrill, or by necessity, but all are touched by the sense that the land remembers, that it holds secrets deeper than any trail map can reveal, and that those who enter may find themselves part of a story older than recorded history, whispered on the wind carried through the trees, and lingering in the silence of the northern range long after the footsteps have faded, a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be fully understood, only felt and respected, and that the wilderness, for all its beauty, harbors echoes of the vanished, keeping them suspended between the past and the unknown, waiting for the next soul daring enough, or perhaps unfortunate enough, to cross its threshold. In 2004's the sprawling wilderness of Kosciuszko National Park in southeastern Australia stretched across snow-capped peaks, dense eucalyptus forests, and hidden valleys, a place where nature's beauty was matched only by its danger. It was a park well known to hikers, climbers, and adventurers, but it also held a darker reputation for disappearances that defied explanation, cases where even experienced outdoorsmen vanished without a trace. Among those drawn to its remote trails was Sophie Callahan, a 28-year-old nature enthusiast and seasoned hiker from Canberra, who had grown up exploring the Australian Alps with her family. Sophie was known for her meticulous planning, her respect for the land, and her ability to navigate the challenging terrain that often intimidated less experienced visitors. One spring morning in September, she set out alone to hike a circuit that would take her to Mount Kosciuszko, the park's highest peak, hoping to reach the summit by late afternoon and watch the sunset over the alpine plains. She left a note in her car at the trailhead, a promise to her friends and family to return by evening, and began her ascent, her boots crunching against the frost-kissed path as birds called from the trees above. Hours passed, and Sophie's progress appeared steady from the trail cameras that recorded distant stretches of the park. But as the afternoon wore on, an unexpected fog rolled in, dense and chilling, weaving between the gullies and ridges and swallowing the familiar landmarks. By the time sunset came, Sophie had not returned to her planned rest stop, and her absence triggered a worried call to the local ranger station. Search teams were dispatched immediately, combing the trails she had been recorded on, scanning steep ridges, rocky outcrops, and forested gullies, but the search yielded no clues. There were no footprints leading off trail, no dropped gear, no sign of struggle, not even a hint of where she might have gone. It was as if the mountain had swallowed her whole, leaving only the whisper of the wind among the trees. Days turned into weeks, and the search expanded, drawing in volunteer teams, police officers, and even experienced mountaineers familiar with Kosciuszko's treacherous terrain. Despite their combined efforts, they found nothing, and the case began to take on a life of its own among local communities and park regulars. Those who knew the park best began to share stories, not as explanations, but as warnings, tales of hikers who had wandered too far, never to be seen again, of sudden whiteouts that appeared even on clear days, of paths that seemed to shift and twist, disorienting even the most seasoned navigators, and of an unshakable feeling of being watched, an unseen presence that seemed to follow anyone venturing too far into the heart of the park. Sophie's disappearance became part of that lore, a cautionary tale of the hidden dangers in a place of breathtaking beauty. Speculation about her fate ran the gamut from plausible to the impossible. Some suggested natural accidents, a fall from an unseen ledge, a sudden injury leaving her unable to move, exposure to the chilling mountain weather that could claim life in minutes. Others considered encounters with wildlife, though no evidence supported a fatal confrontation with the park's native fauna, and no remains were ever discovered. A small, persistent group of locals whispered of something stranger, a zone within the park, a hidden pocket in the alpine landscape where the rules of the natural world bent, where time and distance became unreliable, and where hikers sometimes vanished as though absorbed by the land itself. Over the years, hikers reported eerie occurrences near the routes Sophie was known to take. Some claimed to hear footsteps behind them when none should have been possible. Others saw shadows flit across slopes that were otherwise empty, shapes that appeared humanoid but moved in ways that defied natural motion. Fog would sometimes descend inexplicably, thickening in concentric rings and obscuring entire valleys in minutes. And when it lifted, paths would appear slightly altered, confusing even those who had memorized the terrain. Small artifacts occasionally emerged, a fragment of a backpack strap, a broken piece of trekking equipment, but never enough to provide closure or trace a path back to her. The indigenous peoples of the region, particularly the Ngarigo and Wiradjuri communities, had long told stories about the mountains. They spoke of sacred spaces where spirits resided and where travelers might be guided or trapped by forces beyond ordinary comprehension. Some claimed that these spaces were protected by the land itself, that the mountains held secrets and judged those who moved carelessly through them. Sophie's disappearance, viewed through this lens, was not simply an accident, but part of a continuum of unexplainable vanishings that had occurred in the park for decades. Years later, the mystery of Sophie Callahan remained unsolved. Kosciuszko's peaks and valleys continued to draw hikers, skiers, and adventurers, many unaware of the stories whispered by those who frequented the park. And yet, for those who paid attention, subtle reminders lingered. The sudden chill that settled in a valley, a fleeting shadow on a distant ridge, or the sensation of being observed when alone on a trail. These small intimations served as a quiet testament to the mountain's enduring secrets and to the hikers who had disappeared into its folds, never to return. Though authorities maintained that the park was safe for prepared visitors, the stories persisted, shared in hushed tones around campfires, on online forums, and in the occasional newspaper article. Sophie's family continued to hope for answers, holding on to the belief that she had not simply succumbed to the wilderness, that perhaps she had encountered something beyond human understanding, and that one day the truth would emerge. For now, Kosciuszko stood as it always had, majestic, unforgiving, and enigmatic, a landscape where the line between the known and the unknown was thin, and where those who ventured too far into its hidden valleys risked disappearing into a silence that no search party could ever penetrate. The mystery of Sophie Callahan, like so many other stories of hikers and explorers lost in the park, became a legend whispered among the people who knew Kosciuszko's peaks best. Each disappearance added to the park's aura of mystery, a reminder that even in a country as mapped and traveled as Australia, there are still places that defy explanation. Visitors are drawn to its beauty, its challenge, and its solitude, but the Northern Alps have a way of reminding all who enter that the mountains keep their secrets well, and that some who walk among the snow-capped ridges and hidden gullies may never return, their fate suspended between myth and reality, echoing in the silence of the park and the whispering winds that flow down from the high peaks to the valleys below.